At my parents' anniversary dinner, my sister leaned in and said, "Here's to the family letdown who still believes they matter." My mom laughed. I stayed quiet. That night, I pulled my signature from the one document that had kept me chained to them all these years. The restaurant smelled like money, polished wood, overpoured wine, and the faint perfume of people pretending to love each other. Brin sat across from me, her lipstick the exact coral that always made her look composed, untouchable. She was in the middle of one of her stories, exaggerating for attention, drawing laughter from our mother with the ease of someone who had never been told no. "Here's to Marin," she said, lifting her glass, eyes gleaming. "The family's resident dreamer. Still believing someday she'll figure it out." Her husband snorted. My mother's laugh came a second later, sharp, delighted. My father adjusted his tie and looked at his plate. The clink of silverware covered what I didn't say. I smiled because that's what I do. It's easier to smile than to remind them that I'm sitting right there. I looked toward the briefcase by my father's chair, the corner of a tan folder poking out. I knew exactly what it was, the family trust, the one with my name, my signature, the one that gave Brin power over everything if anything ever happened to them. I signed it last year when Dad was sick, when Brin said, "It'll just make things simpler." Guilt had guided my hand back then. Tonight, clarity did. When dinner ended, I stood, helped my mother with her coat, and let Brin hug me. She smelled like lilacs and victory. "Don't be so sensitive," she whispered in my ear. It was just a joke. Outside, the air was bitter and metallic. I walked to my car without saying goodbye, my heels clicking against the frozen pavement. Inside, I sat in silence for a long moment before starting the engine. Snow gathered on the windshield, soft and soundless. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked unfamiliar, calm, but with a steadiness I hadn't felt in years. Halfway home, my phone buzzed. A message from Brin. "You know I love you, right?" No punctuation, like always. Brin hated endings. I dropped the phone face down on the seat. The roads were nearly empty, dark and slick, streetlights blurring into lines of pale gold. I didn't even realize where I was headed until I saw the familiar brick facade of the First Harbor Bank. My hand brushed against the small brass key on my chain, the one to my safe deposit box. I parked, turned off the car, and sat there. My hands rested on the steering wheel, steady. Inside that box was the copy of the trust document I'd signed, the one that gave her everything. I thought of her laugh, my mother's echo of it, the way my father pretended not to hear. Then I opened the door and stepped into the cold. The road stretched out ahead of me, dark and slick, the lines on the asphalt disappearing under the headlights. The air outside looked frozen, the kind that bites through coats and makes everything feel sharper. I kept one hand tight on the wheel, the other resting uselessly in my lap. The car heater buzzed, but it didn't do much to warm me. My face still burned from what happened at dinner, but the embarrassment had cooled into something heavier, clearer. For a long time, I thought keeping quiet meant keeping peace. I told myself it was better to be the calm one, the dependable one, the one who didn't start fights. But driving through that empty stretch of road, I started seeing things differently. My silence hadn't kept peace. It had just kept me small. I remembered the times Brin called crying, saying she needed help. I co-signed her loan when her boutique idea fell apart. I cleaned up after her mistakes, lied for her when she got into trouble. Every time, she said, "You're the only one I can count on." I thought it meant she valued me. Now I know it only meant I was convenient. The snow thickened, tapping lightly on the windshield. My headlights hit a mailbox, a speed sign, the shadow of an empty bus stop. Everything looked distant and quiet. I didn't even realize how tightly I was gripping the wheel until my hands started to ache. Then my phone buzzed on the seat beside me. I glanced down. A text from Brin. "Don't be so sensitive." It was just a joke. I almost laughed. That line again. The way she always turned her cruelty into something I was supposed to laugh off. I set the phone face down and kept driving. The glow from the screen disappeared, and the car felt darker, peaceful almost. Somewhere along the way, I stopped heading home. My mind drifted, and my hands followed. When I looked up, I recognized the faint glow of the First Harbor Bank sign, the place where I kept the one thing that still connected me to them. I pulled into the lot, cutting the engine. For a while, I just sat there, listening to the faint ticking of the cooling metal. My breath fogged up the glass. The world outside looked cold, but inside the car, everything felt still. I reached for my keychain and turned it in my palm. The brass key was small, smooth from years of use. It opened my safe deposit box, the one that held the trust papers I'd signed last year when Dad was sick and Brin said, "It'll make things easier for everyone." I leaned back and stared through the windshield. The truth was, it had only made things easier for her. I slipped the key into my coat pocket, opened the door, and stepped out. My boots crunched against the thin layer of snow. The air hit my face like ice, but I didn't flinch. The bank stood ahead, silent and still. For once, I wasn't driving away from something. I was walking toward it. The bank was quiet, the kind of quiet that made every sound feel louder. My footsteps echoed against the tiled floor as I walked toward the safety deposit room. The air smelled faintly like metal and dust, and the fluorescent lights hummed overhead. It was late, close to closing time, and the clerk barely looked at me as I signed in. He handed me the small brass key back with a nod. Inside, the vault was colder than I remembered. The walls were lined with silver boxes, each one holding someone's private story. Mine was halfway down the row. I slid the key into the lock, turned it slowly, and pulled the box out. My hands felt steady, though my heart wasn't. I set the box on the narrow table and lifted the lid. Inside were a few envelopes, a birth certificate, and the folded document that had been haunting me since dinner. The Family Trust Amendment. My name sat there beside Brin's, neat and obedient. My signature curved across the page like a chain. I remembered the day I signed it. Dad was still weak from his heart procedure, and everyone spoke softly, as if words could break him. Brin had cried that day. Real tears, the kind that smudge mascara and make people feel sorry for her. She told me, "It's just paperwork, Marin. You're the responsible one. I just need your help until things settle down." I didn't want to make things harder, so I signed. I thought I was being kind. Thought it meant trust. Now, looking at it under the dull vault light, it looked like surrender. Every line of my handwriting felt like proof of how easily I had been convinced. I ran my finger over the ink. "You shouldn't have laughed," I whispered. The sound of my own voice startled me. It was calm, not angry, just final. The kind of tone that comes when something inside you quietly closes. For a moment, I stood there staring at it, the air thick with the hum of the lights. This single sheet of paper was the reason Brin had power, the reason she could use my name whenever she needed to make something look official. She always said we were a team, but teams don't laugh when one player falls. I folded the document carefully and slipped it into the inside pocket of my coat. The paper felt warm against me, as if it carried all the weight of what had gone wrong. I closed the box, slid it back into place, and locked it again. My key clicked softly in the lock. When I turned around, the clerk at the front desk didn't even glance up. To him, I was just another customer leaving with her things. But I knew better. I wasn't leaving with something. I was taking something back. Outside, the air hit me like a wall. The night was dark and windless, the parking lot empty except for my car. I took one last look at the bank's dark windows, then walked toward the car, the paper safe inside my coat. I didn't know exactly what I'd do next, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid of deciding on my own. I sat at my kitchen table with the folded trust paper beside my coffee cup. The house was quiet except for the faint sound of the refrigerator humming. The paper looked harmless, just a few lines of ink, but it carried years of choices that had slowly drained me. I traced the edge of it with my finger and stared at the small wrinkle running down the middle, like a scar. As I looked at it, old memories began to slip in, one after another, like they had been waiting for me to finally stop pretending. I remembered being 18, standing in my room with a college acceptance letter in one hand and a suitcase half-packed on the bed. I had earned a full scholarship to a university in Maine, something I'd worked for since I was a kid. But Dad had just lost his job, and Mom was in tears about bills. Brin stood in the doorway, calm as ever, saying, "You'll have other chances." She was already enrolled in her dream school, funded by a family decision. I unpacked the suitcase that night and told myself it was the right thing to do. Then there was the day of the car accident. I can still smell the sharp sting of burnt rubber and feel the sting on my palms from gripping the steering wheel. Brin had been driving. We were laughing, music up too loud, when she missed a turn and hit a mailbox. No one was hurt, but she froze, panicking. When the police came, she said I was behind the wheel. I remember the look on Mom's face, disappointed, not shocked. I took the blame because arguing with Brin never worked. She always knew how to twist things until you started doubting your own memory. Another scene years later, a Sunday lunch in the garden. Mom sipping wine, talking about how different her daughters were. "Brin just has confidence," she said. "Marin feels too much. She takes everything to heart." I laughed it off, but inside it stung. I wasn't too sensitive. I was just the only one who cared when things were unfair. Those moments didn't feel big when they happened. They were small cuts, quiet ones, but over time they hollowed something out of me. Each one taught me to swallow hurt, to stay calm, to let them believe what they wanted. The memories faded as I looked back down at the paper. I picked it up, feeling the thin weight between my fingers. All these years, I had signed and agreed and stepped aside because I thought that's what love looked like, doing what's best for everyone else. Now, for the first time, I wondered what it would mean to do something for myself. I opened my laptop and searched for the legal terms printed at the bottom of the page. It didn't take long to find what I needed. My consent wasn't permanent. I could revoke it. The words on the screen felt like a door opening. I sat back, staring at the paper again. For the first time, it didn't look like a trap. It looked like proof that I could still choose. I folded it neatly and placed it back on the table. My coffee had gone cold, but I didn't care. I knew what I was going to do next. The morning after I read through the papers again, I knew I couldn't do it alone. I needed someone who understood the language written between those clean legal lines. The name that came to mind first was Jonas Mercer. He'd lived 2 streets over when I was a teenager. I used to babysit his kids, and he always paid me a little extra because, as he said, "You notice the small things." He had since become one of the few lawyers in town who hadn't left for a bigger city. His office was on the 2nd floor of a narrow brick building above a coffee shop. When I walked in, the bell above the door jingled softly. The air smelled like old paper and roasted beans from below. Jonas looked up from his desk, surprised, then smiled. "Marin Calder," he said, standing. "Haven't seen you since you were teaching my twins how to ride bikes." We shook hands, and he gestured for me to sit. "What brings you in? You look like someone carrying more than a grocery list." I set the folded trust papers on his desk. "I need to understand this," I said. "And I need to know what happens if I take my name off it." He unfolded the pages carefully, putting on his glasses. As he read, the room felt too quiet. The only sound was the ticking of a small clock on the shelf behind him. I watched his expression shift as his eyes moved down the page. Curiosity first, then concern. "This is your family trust?" he asked. I nodded. "And you signed this amendment last year?" "Yes. My sister said it would make things easier for everyone." He sighed through his nose. "It makes things easier for her," he said. "Not for you." He tapped a section of the document. "You've granted her power to manage all assets if your parents are unable to. Removing your signature cancels that authority. Without it, she can't access a cent." I leaned forward. "So, I can change it? I can revoke it?" "You can," he said. "But once you do, it'll send up alarms. Your sister will know immediately. She'll call, she'll push, maybe worse. These things get ugly fast, especially when money and pride mix." I met his eyes. "I'm not trying to start a fight. I just want my name back." Jonas leaned back in his chair. "You'll get it back," he said, "but they won't make it easy. When you pull this signature, you're cutting off access to a lot of money. They'll come after you hard." I let out a slow breath. "They already did," I said. "They just called it dinner." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. You've thought this through? I have. He began gathering the papers. Then I'll prepare the revocation form. Once it's filed with the county, your sister won't have control anymore. I watched him slide the document into a folder and label it with his careful handwriting. There was a calmness in the way he worked, and for the first time in a long while, I felt sure of something. As I stood to leave, Jonas said quietly, "You're doing the right thing, even if it doesn't feel like it yet." I gave a small smile. "It's not supposed to feel easy," I said. Outside, the afternoon sun hit the sidewalk, bright and cold. I tucked the folder under my arm and walked toward my car. It wasn't victory I felt, just steadiness. For once, the next step was mine to take. The next morning, I woke up early. The house was still and dim, the kind of quiet that makes every sound seem important. I made coffee but didn't drink it. The paperwork Jonas had prepared sat on the table, the ink on my new signature still slightly shiny. All I had to do was hand it in. Simple, really. But my hands trembled as I slid the papers into an envelope. The county office was on Main Street, next to the post office and across from the park where my sister and I used to play as kids. I parked by the curb and sat for a moment, watching the flag outside shift in the wind. People walked in and out of the building holding folders, chatting about errands, groceries, their days. To them, it was just another morning. For me, it felt like the edge of something final. Inside, the fluorescent lights were too bright. The floor smelled faintly of cleaning products and old carpet. I waited in line behind a man arguing about property tax, holding my envelope tight against my chest. When it was my turn, the clerk didn't look up right away. She had glasses that slid down her nose as she typed. "Filing for revocation of signature," I said quietly. She took the envelope, flipped through the pages, and nodded. "All here." Then she stamped it. One loud, clean sound against the paper. Effective immediately. It didn't feel dramatic. There were no sparks, no rush of relief. Just a small sound of ink against paper. And then it was done. I thanked her and walked out into the sunlight, blinking. For the first time in a long while, I felt light, not happy exactly, but steady. The next few days passed quietly. I went to work, cooked, walked in the evenings. Nothing seemed different, yet everything was. I could breathe without that weight pressing on me. I didn't tell anyone what I'd done. I didn't need to. Then one afternoon, my phone rang. My mother's name flashed on the screen. I let it ring once before answering. Her voice was soft, too careful. "Marin, honey, Brin says there's a problem with the trust paperwork. Some kind of mix-up. Did you change something?" I could almost hear the tension behind her tone, the worry trying to sound polite. I kept my voice calm. "No, Mom. I didn't change anything. I just fixed something." There was a pause. I could hear her breathing, the faint sound of her bracelets clinking. "You shouldn't get involved in things you don't understand," she said finally. "This could cause problems." "It already caused enough," I said. "I just made it fair." She didn't reply. The line went quiet, then she hung up. That evening, I sat by the window with a cup of tea. The sun dipped low, turning the sky orange and soft. My phone stayed silent, but I knew this was only the beginning. Somewhere, Brin would be pacing, trying to reach our parents, realizing her access had been cut off. Somewhere, my mother would be calling the bank, trying to understand why her accounts were frozen. I didn't feel guilty. Not anymore. For years, I had let things slide, let them decide what was right for me. Now, everything was still, waiting. The calm before something louder. I closed my eyes and let the silence stay a little longer. It was late afternoon when I heard a car pull up outside. The sound was sharp, tires scraping against gravel. A door slammed, and before I could stand, the front door burst open. Brin didn't knock. She never did. She came in like a storm, cheeks flushed, hair half pulled out of place, her eyes wild. "What did you do?" she shouted, slamming her purse onto the table. "The bank called. Everything's frozen. Mom and Dad are panicking. You think this is funny?" I stayed still. My teacup sat untouched beside me, the steam fading into the air. "I don't think it's funny," I said quietly. Her voice rose again, breaking. You had no right to mess with the trust. Do you know what you've done? You've ruined everything. I looked at her, really looked. She wasn't furious because she'd lost something. She was terrified because she'd been caught. I just took back what was mine, I said. That's all. Don't twist this, she yelled, pacing. You're doing this out of jealousy. You've always hated that Mom and Dad believed in me more. You couldn't stand it. I stood up, meeting her eyes. No, Brin. I couldn't stand watching you use them. She blinked, thrown off for a second, then laughed bitterly. Use them? You're insane. I walked to the counter and picked up a thin folder. Jonas had given it to me the day before. I slid it across the table toward her. You've been moving money from Dad's business account for your boutique. Quietly, over months. I found the transfers. Her face went pale, but she tried to recover. That's ridiculous. I borrowed some money. He knew about it. No, I said. He didn't. The signatures don't match his. And the withdrawals didn't stop when he got better. For a moment, the only sound was the clock ticking above the stove. Brin's mouth opened, but no words came out. The confidence that usually filled her voice had slipped away. The front door opened again, and Mom stepped in, wrapped in her long coat, her eyes wide with worry. What's happening here? She asked, looking between us. Brin turned toward her instantly. Mom, she's trying to destroy us. She's attacking the family, making up lies. Mom's gaze landed on me. Marin, why would you do something like this? We're family. Family doesn't attack each other. I took a slow breath. My hands didn't shake this time. Family doesn't take advantage of each other either, I said. And they don't laugh when one of them bleeds. Her expression hardened. She reached for Brin's arm, pulling her close. You've gone too far, she whispered, shaking her head. Your father will hear about this. I'm sure he already has, I said. They left without another word. The door slammed again, leaving the room filled with the smell of their perfume and anger. I stood there for a long time, the folder still on the table, papers spread where Brin had pushed them away. The quiet that followed wasn't peaceful, but it was honest. For years, I'd been afraid of breaking the family apart. Now I understood. It had been broken for a long time. I had just stopped pretending it wasn't. The days that followed felt strange, like the air had changed around me. No one called at first, but I could feel the silence stretching, heavy and waiting. Then the messages started coming, short, angry, and panicked. I didn't answer any of them. I already knew what was happening. By the end of the week, word had spread through the small circle of people tied to my parents' estate. The trustees, accountants, and lawyers were all trying to sort through the sudden freeze. Everyone wanted explanations, and Brin's name came up in every conversation. Her confidence, the one she wore like armor, started to slip away. Her boutique, the one she had poured other people's money into, shut its doors overnight. The temporarily closed sign went up, and the social media pages went quiet. Friends stopped answering her calls. Even her business partner, who used to post glowing praise about her, suddenly disappeared. I didn't celebrate it. I just watched it happen from a distance, the way you watch a fire die out after it's burned too long. Then one evening my doorbell rang. I looked through the window and saw my father standing there. He looked smaller than I remembered, shoulders slouched, his coat buttoned wrong. When I opened the door, he smiled faintly. "Can I come in?" he asked. I nodded and led him to the kitchen. He didn't speak right away. His hands rested on the table, the same hands that used to fix everything in the house. Now they trembled slightly. "I found out what you did," he said quietly. "About the paperwork." I waited, unsure what he would say next. He sighed, looking down at his hands. "You saved us from losing everything." I didn't see it happening, but Brin was taking more than I thought. I should have paid attention. There was no anger in his voice, just tiredness. He looked older than before, but gentler too. "I'm sorry you had to be the one to fix what I should have stopped," he said. I didn't know what to say. I just nodded, and for a long time we sat in silence. Before he left, he placed his hand over mine. "Thank you," he said simply, and then walked out into the evening. A few days later, my mother called. I could hear the strain in her voice even before she spoke. "You've turned your back on us," she said flatly. "On your sister. On me." I leaned against the counter, closing my eyes. "No, Mom," I said softly. I just stopped turning my back on myself. There was a pause. Then the line went dead. That night, I sat by the window and watched the streetlights flicker on one by one. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the old wall clock. I thought about the years I had spent trying to be useful, trying to earn a place in a family that didn't see me. And now, without meaning to, I had finally stepped out of their shadow. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like breathing after holding it for too long. The trust was under review. Brin's empire had fallen apart. And for once, I didn't need anyone to tell me I had done the right thing. I already knew. Months passed before I saw them again. The noise around the trust had quieted, and everything that once seemed untouchable had settled into silence. I hadn't planned to invite them, but one afternoon, I found myself setting out plates and dusting the small dining table in my apartment. It wasn't forgiveness that made me do it. I just wanted an ending that belonged to me. My apartment was simple. 2 rooms, soft light, and walls I'd painted myself. It smelled faintly of rosemary and bread baking in the oven. The kind of meal no one would brag about, but one that felt honest. I set out 3 plates and poured a little wine into each glass. The evening was quiet except for the slow ticking of the clock. When the doorbell finally rang, I felt my heartbeat rise but didn't rush to open it. Brin stood there first. Her hair was neat, but her eyes were tired, dark under the lashes. She looked smaller somehow, like her energy had drained out of her. Behind her, my mother stood stiffly, clutching her purse. "Marin," Mom said, her tone polite but distant. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. They entered carefully, as though the space might reject them. Brin glanced around at the plain furniture, the faded rug. "You've done well for yourself," she said after a pause. It wasn't sarcasm this time, just something she said because she didn't know what else to say. We sat. The plates clinked softly as I set the food down. Nobody talked much. The room held the kind of silence that has weight. I could feel their eyes shift to each other, then down to their plates. I didn't fill the silence. I'd learned how powerful it could be. After a while, I poured the wine and held up my glass. My voice came out calm, steady. "Here's to the family letdown," I said, looking between them. "The one who finally remembered she matters." Neither of them moved at first. My mother's eyes flickered, searching for a response that wouldn't come. Brin's lips parted slightly, like she wanted to argue, but no words followed. The air between us thickened. I took a slow sip and set my glass down. The taste wasn't sweet or bitter, just quiet. We ate in silence. Forks against plates, the occasional sound of someone breathing too hard. It wasn't comfortable, but it was real. There were no cruel jokes, no laughter forced at my expense, no pretending things were fine. For the first time in years, the table felt balanced. When dinner ended, Brin stood, thanked me softly, and left without meeting my eyes. Mom followed, her perfume lingering faintly in the doorway. After the door closed, I cleared the table slowly, washing each dish by hand. The apartment felt warm, still smelling of baked bread and wine. The silence that filled the room wasn't heavy anymore. It felt earned, like peace that didn't need to be explained. That night, the sky was clear, and the air carried that sharp chill that comes before winter. I stood in the small yard behind my apartment with the revoked trust papers in my hand. The ink looked faded under the porch light, my signature a thin loop at the bottom. For a long moment, I just stared at it, thinking about how much of my life had been tied to that single line of ink, how easily I had given it away, and how hard it had been to take it back. I crouched by the metal fire pit and struck a match. The flame flickered weakly at first, then caught. I held the corner of the document near it until the edge began to blacken and curl. The paper folded in on itself, twisting as the fire took hold. The signature disappeared last, turning to a thin line of smoke that drifted upward and vanished into the night. I didn't feel anger anymore or sadness, just a quiet kind of release. The sound of the crackling fire was soft, steady, like the world was finally exhaling with me. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't have to check to know who it was. I pulled it out anyway and saw my mother's name flashing on the screen. For a second, I almost answered, out of habit more than anything else. But then I remembered every time I had tried to explain myself and been met with laughter or silence. I let the phone ring until it stopped. The night was still again. A faint breeze carried away the ashes, scattering them across the yard. I brushed the soot from my hands and looked up at the stars. They looked cold and far away, but steady, something I could count on without asking for approval. In my head, I heard Brin's words from that night at the restaurant. Here's to the family letdown who still believes they matter. Only now they didn't sting. They sounded hollow, like something from a story that no longer belonged to me. I stood there until the last bit of fire went out. The ashes were gray and still, the paper gone completely. For the first time in a long while, I felt light, like I had finally stepped out of a cage I'd built myself. And I didn't need anyone to tell me I mattered. I already knew. Do you think I did the right thing by walking away from them? Or should I have given my family another chance? Tell me what you think in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like mine.